millennia ago, a culture that is still unknown to us today erected thousands of mounds throughout the Midwestern United States to the Gulf of Mexico. They are called the Hopewell, the Adena, or the Mississippian. However, no one knows what these people actually called themselves. In other words, they remain mysterious and unknown to us today. When the first white settlers came into the Great Circle Mound in Ohio, they asked the Native Americans living there who built this. The natives replied they didn't know who built them, as the large mounds were there and abandoned when they arrived. The discovery of these mounds created a controversy that some posited the mounds were built by an unknown lost tribe of people who migrated, perhaps, from the Old World. Others thought that they had been one of the lost tribes of Israel. This debate continued until the late part of the 19th century, when the conclusion was made that Native Americans had built the mounds and that they had simply forgotten that they had done so. This is now the accepted paradigm. However, is it the truth of what occurred in the ancient past? Or has the information been managed to bolster a particular narrative? Join us as we explore the mysterious mound builders.
We heard about a site off the St. Johns River off of Lake Woodruff called Tick Island, named for the tick marking on the pottery. And a gentleman it was a large snail shell midden, which means, living space burial ground. And he had leased the shell rights to that. He was in there 5 days a week with a bulldozer, a backhoe, a dump truck, and a barge. Now, the first time we went there, he pretty much excavated through the middle of the mound. This mound covered about 3 acres and was about 3 stories high. It was massive. It was a massive settlement. Well, like I said, we went there pretty much every weekend because he wasn't working on the weekends, and a little bit of digging around we did didn't mess up his, destroying the mound, so he didn't care. And back then, we probably had the 3rd largest collection of Florida artifacts in the state from this one particular site. In '61, we finally got the state archaeologist to come down and take a look at it. And I found the newspaper article I just found about that. He took out 147 skeletons, had them carbon dated to 5500 BC. Of course, he wouldn't listen to us where to dig. He did not dig in the oldest part of the mound, or where the oldest artifacts would be found. We did find one burial site where there were literally giants. There weren't any artifacts with them, which was kind of unusual, but they were in a separate place all by themselves. We didn't find any kind of tools buried with them. Just the skeletons. A leg bone from the ankle to the knee would come up to my waist. Father picked up a skull and was able to just set it over the top of his head. One other thing you might be interested in, not far from that, was another burial. Again, no artifacts, but the skeletons looked normal, the people were normal size, but the skulls were elongated. I mean, they were truly giants. I mean, they weren't just tall people. I'd say probably in the 10-foot range. And, of course, the mound is pretty much non-existent now. It's a nature preserve, I think is what they call it.
The Serpent Mound is the largest snake effigy in the world. It sits on an outcropping of land that overlooks a waterway. The serpent undulates through the landscape, and this corresponds to solar alignments. Some say that the head points to the summer solstice. A 2-story tower is erected on the site so visitors can see the serpent's body. However, even from this vantage point, it's still difficult to see the head of the serpent. It is only when one is high above the effigy does one begin to see the serpent's head, whose mouth is wide open in the act of swallowing an egg. Why go through the trouble of constructing this if the person viewing it can't really see what they are looking at unless they are high in the air above the effigy? Who is the prince of the power of the air?
We're here at the Spring Equinox 2018, Fritz Zimmerman, L.A. Marzulli at the Serpent Mound. There's some new signage here that is telling us that the Shawnee somehow were responsible for this incredible mound that we see, this effigy of a serpent. First of all, I want you to address that. Why do you think it's not the Shawnee?
Well, originally the Shawnee said they never built this.
Right.
And so this acquisition is more modern day, but didn't really have serpents in their iconography of religion. We're never really known to be mound builders, so it's a mystery.
I can send you the quote from Chief Wallace of the Shawnee tribe saying they did not build these mounds. See, what's happening now is with the implementation of NAGPRA, which is good, the Native American Grave Repatriation Act, and that's, if you find skeletons, if you find remains, if you find artifact, or whatever, that it's protected by the federal government, and the tribe who's assigned to that region then takes custody of those items. The problem with that is that a lot of these mounds, the Native people didn't build. We didn't build them. Our ancestors didn't build them. So we are taking responsibility for something that we didn't make, and now the historical narrative is changing. Think about what better way to keep people from going into the mounds or finding, 7, 8, 9 foot tall skeletons than to have a standing force of Native Americans who are going to come and they're going to protest and they're going to stop anything like that from happening. But that's interesting that you said that, because I'll send this to you. I'll send you an article from Indian Country Today Media Network, which is the largest and oldest Native American news source in the country. They've been around for, I think, over 40 years. But Chief Wallace is quoted as saying that they did not build the mounds, that the Shawnee had nothing to do with the mound complex at Serpent Mound.
And of course, there's a lot of speculation about what this means. And what we see is it's a serpent which undulates over the terrain, and with its mouth open, and there's an egg. There seems to be an egg, and the serpent is in the act, in my opinion, of swallowing the egg. And again, this goes back to the Genesis 3:15 narrative. But there was also an altar in the middle of that. Tell us about what the people who came here originally found with the altar, and describe some of the burial mounds that were found here and what they discovered there.
On the site and just behind us, there were 3 burial mounds, 3 being most associated with Adina. Within the circle of the egg was a small stone mound that the stones were burnt, so it was used as some kind of altar. Also, there was a monolith, a rather large stone associated with that, which harkens back to more of a megalithic artifact.
There was an altar at the serpent's mouth, and of course the serpent is, in my opinion, is devouring the egg, is eating the egg. And I think this goes back to Genesis 3:15, where it says specifically, the seed of a serpent will be at war, at enmity with the seed of the woman. And so I think that this whole effigy mound here is the serpent in the act not of giving birth to the egg, but trying to destroy the seed, trying to destroy that egg. So there was a altar there at one time, apparently, and we believe that there might have been human sacrifice. But this pillar was also erected at the site. Talk about that, Fritz.
Well, the pillar is definitely harkens back to the megalithic days, and there's no doubt about that. So when we consider that, then we have to ask, who built the serpent mound? And it has to be megalithic builders. And we do have in the Ohio Valley different stone mounds, doorway lintels, very similar to what you would find in England. This has to be associated with the Amorites, the Babylonians, who inhabited England, and then here.
So once again, we're seeing a Middle Eastern connection.
Absolutely.
Chief Joseph Riverwind is a Taino peace chief. He is the author of That's What the Old Ones Say, which brings to life the oral tradition of Native Americans. He brings a unique perspective to this film as he presents stories that have been handed down through the centuries that seem to contradict the official narrative that we are all told must have taken place. That the Native Americans built the mounds but had forgotten that they had done so.
I want to kind of drill down on the idea of the solstices and the equinoxes. Did Native Americans know about them, number one? And if so, did they make edifices to mark them? Did they do anything like that?
The nomadic tribes did. They very much moved by the lunar calendar and also solar calendar. There was an agricultural calendar that was used, and they were very much aware of solstices and equinoxes. Obviously, they weren't called that back in those times, but to the level of sophistication that you find in the mound building civilizations, that took a level of intelligence and knowledge that, although some nomadic tribes had knowledge of the constellations, of the moon cycles, the sun cycles, and they based their migration patterns off of that. The only difference is we find these mound complexes that have exponential knowledge of the stars and the constellations, and then you've got the effigies that are made, the oral tradition of the Lenni Lenape, which are known as the Delaware. They say that the Allegheny, the giants, were the ones who built the serpent mound.
Fallen angels, as we know, mated with the women and created this race of giants. And these fallen angels also taught these giants secrets.
Right.
One of the secrets was metallurgy. The secrets were the alignments of the sun and the moon and the stars. And we see all of this within
and the sites.
Within the earthworks. We know that one of the secrets was mathematics, the use of pi and square root. And we can even, with the Amorites, the account of giants of the Bible, we know they developed that when they controlled Babylon from 2000 BC to 1600 BC with Hammurabi, was the first laws that were ever developed. Mathematics, pi, square roots. They knew the Pythagorean theorems before Pythagorean was even around, and we find those in the earthworks. So all those secrets that are listed by the different angels that taught them this knowledge, we find in the Ohio mounds. So historically, if we're going to ascribe these to any people, it would make sense that these are the fallen angels, or the sons of the fallen angels.
Nephilim.
The Nephilim.
Now, if you take that even further back to the oral tradition of the star people, you're coming down and taking the women, and then these giants are born from this, just like the Genesis 6 account, and not just the biblical account, but you find and hear this account in tribes all across the world. Then we have a ground zero, so to speak, of where this knowledge came from. And of course, you look at the book of Enoch, and it tells, what was taught by some of these fallen beings. So in my opinion, the fallen beings that we find in the biblical narrative and Enoch are the star people that our oral tradition talks about. Now, when these beings taught the people these things, they're the ones who brought the knowledge of the astronomy, of the building. The serpent mound itself, the way it's built, it's incredible. Not only are the four, the humps, if you want to call them, on the snake, timed perfectly to the solstices and equinoxes, they also can correlate with the lunar cycles.
No one actually knows who built the enormous mound that is just outside the modern city of St. Louis. It is called Cahokia. Its base is wider than the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. It towers upwards to 100 feet, and on top of the mound is a large platform. It is the largest earthen mound in North America. There are over 450,000 tons of earth that were moved to create Monk's Mound at Cahokia. How was the dirt moved and compacted? Why would a group of hunter-gatherer people do this? We were told that flint and the shoulder bones of deer or elk were used to make primitive hoes that dug into the earth, and then the dirt was moved in deer hide bundles. However, has anyone actually tested this theory? Are we supposed to believe that this is done with primitive tools? Is it possible that there is perhaps a supernatural explanation to this enigma? And why is challenging this so-called accepted paradigm taboo in both archaeological circles as well as academia in general?
They call it Monk's Mound because of the Catholic Church and the monks that were here. They don't know who built this complex. They really have no idea who built it. They call it Cahokia because just like the Hopewell Indians in Ohio, Hopewell was a farmer. They don't know what the people who built the mounds in Ohio were really called. So they make names up like the Hopewell, like the Adena, like Cahokia. They just make these names up, and no one really knows who the people were. They don't know how this was constructed. And the reason why I'm here, this all goes back into the mound culture. I believe that there is a hidden history throughout the world, which has been deliberately obfuscated from the peoples of the world. And part of being on the trail and visiting these sites, there's nothing like boots on the ground, folks. When you're here and the wind's in your hair and the Mississippi's off to your left and you get a feel for the country, and I'm on top, I can see for miles, literally for miles up here. It's absolutely incredible. And of course, the complex has many different mounds on it.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of the other places I've been, like Teotihuacan in Mexico, and then of course, Corral down in Peru. There's a similarity. Mainstream archaeologists will tell us that this mound was constructed over a period of decades, maybe a couple of hundred years, by Native Americans, allegedly, with birch bark baskets, however big they were, and clamshells, and stone hoes, and they dug the dirt and they hauled it. And I asked one of the docents in there, I said, listen, you've got engineering, you've got building techniques, you've got advanced mathematics, and there's no pre-existing culture. All this just rises up out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And so in my opinion, this is fallen angel technology, Nephilim architecture. There's no pre-existing culture before Cahokia, and yet we see advanced mathematics, knowledge of the solar system, just rise up from out of nowhere. And that begs the question, where does it come from? We don't have, the West, in Europe, doesn't have this geometry till, come on.
I don't know.
Any answer to that?
I don't have an answer to that, but I can make it even more difficult.
Okay, good.
Poverty Point, which is in northern Louisiana, has some of those orientations. Poverty Point goes back to 1600 BC.
Well, we're looking at Mound A. Mound A is the main mound for the complex here at Poverty Point.
So what's astounding about this plaque, we just read it, we're trying not to laugh. How many tons was it?
There's 390,000 tons.
Say that number again, Rick.
390,000.
Okay, so 390,000 tons of dirt.
Moved a basket load at a time.
So the question is, how is this really done? And we're going to show you with the chert hoe in this film how much dirt chert hoe can actually dig. That's going to be our experiment. So we're going to have someone with that chert hoe digging and digging and digging just to see how much dirt they can dig. The bottom line is this. If the theory doesn't fit reality, then you've got to come up with a different theory, however outlandish that is.
Exactly.
What are your thoughts on this? How do you think it might have been accomplished?
Well, it could have been through influence of a different being. Maybe an angelic being, or it could have been that type of supernatural. It had to be some type of supernatural occurrence.
It's not saying that Native people couldn't do it, but here's something really interesting about Cahokia. Back in, I think it was 2015, Monk's Mound, they did some renovations because it was falling apart. Well, there were some people who came in, some researchers, and they took soil samples, and from the soil samples they were able to find that there was pollen and seeds in the different layers of the mounds that shows that these mounds were built in decades. Not like the report in the 1960s by archaeologists that said it took maybe 250 years to build Monk's Mound. This is strikingly different. Of course, the whole narrative of Native people without wheels, like wheelbarrows or carts, but just carting baskets of dirt. And they said, it took maybe 250 years. But this new research shows that the Monk's Mound, the largest one, only took a few decades to build. And there's a lot of different, even in the levels that you find there's layers of black soil, white soil, red soil. There's different layers of soil. They also took sod and put it upside down in layers. And my guess is that's for waterproofing. So in general, for all the different mounds that we've looked at and that we've traveled to, it's almost the same story that the native people say, we didn't build them. They were here before us. The giants built them. They were anywhere from 7 to 9 foot tall, and they were rulers. They conquered the indigenous people.
My name's Chris Levitt.
Chris, we're here at Monk's Mound, and I guess you just toured the area, and I asked you a question, and you've been nice enough to come on the record and answer that question.
Yes.
And looking at this mound, do you believe the official story that Native Americans took birch bark baskets and clamshells and hauled the dirt one basket at a time to build the mound?
I do in some ways. In other ways, I think they needed some heavy equipment to do this much, this much work.
Behind you is Monk's Mound. Do you think it was built by people?
No.
Who do you think built it?
Giants.
Why?
Because how would people build that? It had to be giants.
Fort Ancient sits on a high place overlooking the Little Miami River in Ohio. It is constructed of over 18,000 feet of earthen walls, and some of these walls are over 20 feet high. In antiquity, they may have been as high as 30 feet. It would take 200 miles of dump trucks filled with earth to construct this. We are once again told that the Native American used primitive tools to create these mounds, and the official narrative insists hoes made from flint or shoulder blades of deer were used to construct this mysterious earthwork. Whoever built this were accomplished mathematicians and engineers, as there is advanced mathematics embedded in the construction of the site. The site is also constructed on an 18-and-a-half-year lunar calendar, which is what we find in the Great Circle Mound in Ohio, as well as America's Stonehenge in New Hampshire. Is this a coincidence? Are we observing the remnants of a hidden history?
So Fort Ancient, again, hilltop enclosure, 18,000 feet of earth walls, built 2,000 years ago by people that we call the Hopewell cultural people. They would have used nothing more than the shoulder bones of deer and elk, split elk antler, clamshell, hose, digging sticks. Placing the soil into baskets that we've demonstrated would have held no more than about 35 to 40 pounds of soil. There is an estimated 553,000 cubic yards of soil at this site. The 553,000 cubic yards of soil, if we were to tear apart all of the earth walls, all 18,000 feet, and put them into dump trucks, each dump truck holding between 15 and 20 tons of soil, and park it at the Jeremiah Morrow Bridge on Interstate 71, which is about a mile and a half away from here. Start parking the dump trucks end for end. You will end up 15 miles from downtown Cleveland, 200 miles away.
Mainstream archaeology will tell us that Native Americans used sticks or these flint hoes to dig the dirt. And in Cahokia, there's a 45-acre plaza. That 45-acre plaza is leveled within 2 inches. How is that done? But my question to you is, how would they possibly compact the soil to make the mound at Cahokia or Poverty Point or Miamisburg? Your thoughts on that?
Have you ever tried to dig through red clay with a rock or with a stick? It's pretty difficult. It's not that it can't be done, but it definitely would take a long time. There's pits that have been found where a lot of the soil and the dirt and the clay was excavated from in order to build these mounds. But the compacting of it, I've heard one elder say that they use big trees, big logs that were hewn, almost like a ancient steamroller type of thing that you would use, like, you know, for flattening things or for using to make a road. That was done in order to make that nice level plain and to compact the dirt. But living in the Southeast and trying to build, just even trying to do a garden, where I break rototillers, okay, a gas-powered rototiller, and I'm breaking the rototiller trying to dig into that soil and trying to dig into that clay. And I would sit there thinking about this as I'm tilling the garden, going, man, stone tools, wood implements, hands, and they're digging this and breaking the soil with this, and I'm sitting here breaking a metal gas-powered tiller on the soil. A lot of the stories talk about, and I said this before, that the giants were the ones who built these mounds. Yes, there are mounds that were built as replicas much later in later cultures, but you always find that they're smaller. They don't last as long. They've eroded much faster than some of these ancient mounds that have been here for 1,500, 1,000 years. So the technology that was used, I don't know personally. I haven't found yet. I haven't found in my research or from the stories of the elders. So usually it's just the giants built them and then they ruled from there.
For an ancient, it had both solar and stellar alignments. And the mere size contradicts kind of how the Native Americans lived. How they were conquered in the US is because they were never able to organize. And this would have required a mass organization, because unless you go there and see, which we did,
right,
the size of the earthwork and how many men it would have taken to construct this, not over 1,000 years, it was probably constructed over a relatively short period of time.
I agree.
But it would have required that organization of bringing in people from distant lands.
We were curious to see how an ancient flint hoe would actually work in the soil around Poverty Point. We hired a flint maker to create a replica of the hoe, and after procuring a fit laborer, headed out into the field to see how much dirt could be dug, collected, and hauled to the mound site.
My name is Rick Woodward. I'm an archaeologist, and I'm working with Spiral of Life here near Poverty Point. We are doing some time volume tests, some experiments, how much time it takes to move a certain amount of soil. We wanted to do that to see how the mounds were built and the time factor that it would take. I wanted to describe this hoe a little bit so you can get a good idea of the instrument that they used. As you can see, it's beveled on each side, which would have called bifacing. They bifaced this piece of flint. Then it was fitted into this handle where it was pitch, and you can't see the pitch, but inside of these wrappings, there's a dark resin pitch that would have acted as a glue to hold this in. Then it would have been wrapped in rawhide. The rawhide would have been wet so that when it shrank, it would have held this novaculite head in this handle, and they would have been able to use it. It's very tough. It's a very rugged instrument, and I wanted to thank the Mr. Epperson, who actually did this exact replica. But this is the tool that they would have used, and this tool would have been used for over 6,000 years. Then the next thing we're going to do is take that soil that we've dug out of the hole, and we're going to put it into a vessel, and we're going to time that operation to see how much time it takes to do that. Once we get that done, we're going to take that bucket and we're going to walk a specific measured distance that would have been very close to the distance that they would have had to walk to carry this soil to the spot where the mound was going to be built. Then the soil would have been dumped. It would have been packed down. And we timed that operation.
Cyrus Thomas is credited as creating the paradigm, which still exists today, that Native Americans built the mounds, but they had forgotten they had done so. However, are there artifacts that might point to a different narrative? Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, reports of giant skeletons were printed in newspapers all across the country, as people dug into the mounds and unearthed the bones of what seemed like a lost race. Why has this been left out of the official narrative? Why are other artifacts like axe heads weighing over 30 pounds called ceremonial? What if they're not ceremonial, but utilitarian? Why is it that Native Americans talk about a race of giants that inhabited the land before they did? They tell of six-fingered, red-haired giants who were often cannibalistic as well as sexually perverse. Is there a hidden history that has been deliberately obfuscated?
2013, in the fall of 2013, I was allowed access to the Ralph Glidden files. Some of these files are represented on the wall, but a vast majority of them are not. For instance, the picture over in the far corner showing Ralph Glidden standing in a recently excavated grave. What's amazing about that photo is in front of him was pay dirt for me. And we've had that particular photograph analyzed by 3 different computer analysts who look at the photograph, and through different means were able to ascertain that what this skeleton was in front of Mr. Glidden was approximately a 9-footer. The History Channel in 2014, their closing show, Inssearchable Arts Giants, actually interviewed me because of this picture. They also flew out to Catalina. They looked at the picture of Ralph Glidden standing in the recently excavated tomb and saw that very large skeleton, but they didn't analyze the photograph. And so this is sort of my intellectual property. What was astounding to us is that 3 different people came up with a 9-foot skeleton in front of Glidden, using different computer models, allowing for the difference in space between Glidden and where the skeleton was. And of course, Glidden was about 5 foot 8 inches. We know that from numerous witnesses on the island who were acquainted with Glidden in life. So we know that his height was 5 foot 8 inches, and extrapolating that skeleton, taking it out of the picture and then reconstructing it, showed us approximately a 9-footer. We rounded it down to an 8.5-footer. But that's only one of the photographs that we found in the Glidden archive, which of course was incredible. The second photograph I was able to uncover, which of course was pay dirt for me. And remember, when I'm in the archive, I'm going in with a special lens, a worldview. I'm looking for evidence of giants. I'm looking for evidence of skeletons with 6 fingers on the hand. And I'm rummaging through these photographs, looking at them very carefully. I've got my white gloves on, being very meticulously, putting them back into the correct folders and everything. And what astounded me is I just went, oh my gosh. And I called John Borgina, the former curator of the museum, over, and I said, how many fingers do you see here? And he counted them, and he said, oh my gosh, there's 6. And the reason why that's interesting is because Native American cultures, from New Hampshire to the Chumash Indians out here in California, talk about a race of cannibalistic giants, many of whom had red hair, which populated the area, and they also had 6 fingers. We hear this legend from tribe after tribe after tribe, all through the Americas. We had an artifact in front of the picture, and based on that size of the artifact, and again, corresponding and talking to John Borgina, we believe that 6-fingered skeleton was approximately 9 foot tall. So now we have 2. Why do you think there seems to be a deliberate cover-up of this information? The Smithsonian kind of buries it. Mainstream archaeology, no pun intended, buries it. My work out in Catalina that showed a 9-foot giant, and then the picture's redacted. Why are the powers that be so afraid to reveal this, in your opinion?
On a very base level, the Darwinian paradigm is what has been established, has been accepted by the scientific community, and that's what they're going with, and there's a lot of people's credentials and careers on the line. If the Darwinian paradigm were to collapse, there'd be a lot of people that would look really foolish, and we'd have to rewrite our history books. Our history books would have to be rewritten. Anthropology, that's on the very surface level, but there's a lot of deeper levels. I mean, you get down to the deeper levels, you start to deal with the occult. And see, the occult, the hierarchy, the mystery schools, and the occultists involved in the left and the right-hand path of the occult world, they want to resurrect the empire of the gods, the world that existed before the flood. They literally want to resurrect that world and bring about the return of the entities that existed in it.
The First Nations oral tradition about the giants, I have yet to come across a tribe or a member of a tribe who does not have stories about giants in the land. In almost all the stories, almost all of them, there's very distinct features to them. Red-haired, double rows of teeth, and 6 fingers on their toes and their hands. That seems to be the recurring theme in a lot of the stories. Just like you said, Lovelock Cave with the Paiutes. It's the same story, same physical description. The skeletons that are being taken out of the mounds back in the 19th century. Matter of fact, Serpent Mound was one in 1872. The Historical Collections of Noble County, Ohio, has a write-up of 3 skeletal remains that were taken out of the Serpent Mound, and they were 8 foot tall with double rows of teeth. We have the stories of red hair, at least 7 to 9 foot tall. Every tribe has stories of them. I have yet to come across a tribe that does not have stories of giants. And in all their stories, the giants are not good. They rule the people. They're very evil. They're sadistic, sexually sadistic. They would raid often, killing people, killing warriors. They would just bite a warrior's head off and just drink the blood and just throw the body down. And so there were battles and wars between many of these tribes and these giants. And it continued for a long time. Now,
numerous accounts by Native Americans of the Chippewa, of Chief Joseph, who not only said it was a long ago people, but said it was a white-skinned people. There's things that they came from foreign lands. It says that they had come from foreign lands and set up trading in here by consent. By consent of the Indians, they were allowed to do this commerce. And it's not one story, but it's 13 or 14 stories that they had yellow hair, red hair, light skin, engaged in commerce. Everything that we would believe would be associated with the copper trade. And so that's their history. But even if you reiterate their stories, you're still called a racist because they'll say, well, they didn't actually say that. So there's no winning in this argument against some people.
In Newark, Ohio, there is perhaps one of the most enigmatic earthworks on our planet. The Great Circle Mound and Octagon Complex is the largest earthen enclosure in the world. When it was in use thousands of years ago, the site encompassed over 3,000 acres. The Great Circle Mound is one of the largest circle mounds in America, with a deep moat surrounded by walls that tower 8 feet high. The Octagon Mound, like America's Stonehenge, and the Serpent Mound is also constructed on an 18.5-year lunar cycle. It would appear that whoever built this amazing edifice had advanced mathematical and engineering skills. Like many other sites, it is only appreciated when seen from the air. Who is the Prince of the Power of the Air?
When the first white settlers came into the area, which is now Newark, Ohio, they asked the people who were there, the Native Americans, who built this? And the Native Americans said, we don't know. They could not provide an answer. Your thoughts on that?
some tribes didn't know just simply because they didn't know. And others, the ones who did, they always give the same answer. The giants built them. The giants built them.
This is one of the most compelling parts of the Mound culture, really, is the sophistication behind it all. And this is why, you know, we have to thank Squire and Davis for making all these surveys in the 1800s. If they hadn't have done that, most of them would have been obliterated and forgotten about. But they're fantastic surveys, we must give them credit for. But some of them are so large, as you said, that even to create a circle, a simple circle, you know, imagine you're standing in the middle with a pole, a bit of string, and you're making, you know, trying to make a circle which is like 500 meters in that direction, and then 500 in that, you know, some of them are that big, they're almost a kilometer wide. It's almost impossible to comprehend how they were surveying and how they were laying this out in such detail, with the geometry, with the precision alignments to the sun, moon, and stars. And also the measurement systems they were using were all based on harmonic number systems, which is like, incredible. Where did all this come from?
When you look at that, it's like, is this serendipitous? Can all of this stuff have happened serendipitously?
Just by
chance happen, but this was really some agricultural small villages of Native Americans who decided to build this geometric earthwork based on pi, square roots,
which they didn't
geometrics, which they didn't know.
Yeah.
And they say they didn't know.
We're not disparaging Native Americans or their culture. I mean, we're not. That's not what we're saying. We're just trying to drill down on what the truth is. I mean, if Native Americans didn't build the Serpent Mound or Fort Ancient or Mesquite Mound or Poverty Point or Cahokia, then who did? And that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of. And I think as we continue the research, I think we'll find out maybe who.
The truth. That's all we're looking for. With not disparaging
any
any
groups. We have no agenda other than who built them. What is the truth?
They always give the same answer. The giants built them. The giants built them.
Is there a bias in both academia and the scientific community? Are students taught a controlled narrative, a managed agenda which promulgates exclusively only one paradigm? If so, are there archaeologists, college professors, and others who have lost tenure, been fired, or not promoted because their paradigm and worldview was in contradiction to the accepted one? With so much information and evidence that seems to point to another narrative, why is this ignored? Why in some institutions is it considered taboo to even discuss alternative theories? What is the truth? Nick Faust is an archaeologist whose career spans over 35 years. He has worked at over 3,000 archaeological sites in North America, and there is an award given to other archaeologists that bears his name, the Nicholas Faust Award.
I understand that there is a problem in archaeology, especially here in North America, regarding large hominids that have been found all over the East and the Midwest especially. Also here in the West at Lovelock Cave and Brewer's Cave in Utah. And what archaeologists in the past have found was that there were large human beings, 8 to 9 feet tall, that were fairly prevalent throughout North America. And these people may have been the Nephilim in the Bible. The problem seems to be that the remains of these people, once they were excavated, were confiscated by the Smithsonian Institute, and these remains were never seen again. So we're wondering what happened to them. What did the Smithsonian Institute do with these remains? Many of them were in very good condition as well. And why they did what they did with these remains and why they're not on display in Washington, D.C. The question seems to be the concept of Darwinism, and that the powers that be in the world wanted us to have a false paradigm that human evolution came from Africa, from the great apes and things like that, that somehow we miraculously became human beings through a 3.5 to 4 or 5 million year time span. The idea that I seem to recognize is that Darwinism became kind of a religious approach to academic ideas about the evolution of humanity, the bias against that which could be considered supernatural. And it does seem that what we wanted to find, or what our academic overlords wanted us to understand, was that human evolution began in Africa, and we went through a complete lineage of evolution here upon Earth with no outside interference of any kind. and that human beings developed kind of spontaneously without any guidance or care from outside sources.
In 2013, Mark Armitage was fired from his job as a lab technician at California State University Northridge. He was dismissed because he published a paper stating that he had found soft tissue in the fossilized bone of a triceratops. Armitage's paper and findings went against the prevailing paradigm in the academic and scientific community. He took his case to court, and the university agreed to settle out of court. Here is his story.
Wanted to interview you. I followed your lawsuit against University of California Northridge.
Yes, sir.
And I was just amazed by that. So, the backstory is you're up at Hell Creek, you find this Triceratops horn, you take it back, and you find soft tissue. I mean, that's hard science. Talk to that, speak to that a little bit, please.
Quite a bit of experience publishing before I got to the Hell Creek situation. And the other thing is that I had been trying to find a team for 6 years who would work with me to go after this soft tissue. Of course, Dr. Mary Schweitzer, University of North Carolina, had done some very good work, very careful, very highly qualified work, published quite a bit. But the soft tissue aspect of dinosaur remains has been in the literature, by literature I mean secular publications, since the 60s. And so nobody tells you that because they didn't want to draw attention to it, I would assume. I would assume that's their reasons. So by the time I got to Hell Creek, I had already spent many years building my own microscope laboratory. And so after I got my team assembled, we went to Hell Creek. We dug for 3 days and found nothing. At the very end of the third day, we found this huge horn, Triceratops horn. I brought it back to my lab. So I published the paper at the insistence of a longtime member of the biology department who'd been there almost 50 years. And he was dumbfounded. He was astounded by the work and insisted on publishing it, and he fast-tracked it. It was accepted for publication early in January, and it went online. It was published online for a long time, and there were a lot of cries. We learned this in the lawsuit. A lot of cries from a lot of different quarters in biology to strike the paper and do not publish it in the print journal. So it was published, and then the university decided 2 weeks later to terminate me and concoct a story, which, often happens. I stood up to it. I went through 6 attorneys before finally landing on the 7th attorney, group of attorneys. We had been waiting for all of their documents. They're required to produce, and so are we, to produce all the relevant documents. And they dragged their feet and dragged their feet. Finally, the judge was about to sanction them, and so they dumped 13,000 pages on us a week before. We found some incredible smoking guns. The initial amount that they offered me in the very, very beginning was $25,000, and of course the final amount was well into 6 figures.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, is there a academic bias? I mean, is there a bias in the scientific / academic community? I mean, isn't that really, when you drill down to the story, that's what's really going on here? Someone walks into your office and says, this department will not tolerate your religion, when it has nothing to do with your religion. You're just presenting what you discovered, Triceratops horn. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I think in this particular instance, the bias was so deeply invested in their hearts that they didn't have to think twice about the implications for the soft tissue in dinosaur bone. I mean, they saw the connection right away. They put 2 and 2 together. And the other important thing is I gave full and complete disclosure about my Christianity, about my master's degree at the Institute for Creation Research when it was located in San Diego, about my degrees, my 2 graduate degrees from Liberty University, about my Christian creationist publication history, and my well-established secular publication history, and they were so thrilled at my capabilities in microscopy, my long heritage in microscopy, and then all the secular papers that showed that not only am I a decent microscopist, but I found novel things that are publishable that the scientific community needs to see. And so it was a small group of powerful people in the department who pulled this off. And what's really funny is the major player was terminated. After the settlement, he was drummed out of the department.
So you find this Trisopterus horn and you're taking it back to your lab. You know, you've got really no dog in the hunt. Okay, you want to see what's in it, but you're not like fudging the results, and that's why your peer review paper, this is what you found. And that's science. That's good science. That's what science is supposed to be. You know, you had an artifact, you went in, you opened it up, and you document everything, and this is the results. And yet the blowback you got from this ended up in your termination. Speak to that, please.
No, you're absolutely correct. The paper was strictly science, and there is a review in the journal Nature. I think it's Nature Communications. Of course, Ben Stein did his now famous movie about it, Expelled No Intelligence Allowed. I own the depositions, and so therefore we're working to put these into print with a little bit of commentary so that people can see and hear for themselves this bias that you speak of, and the outright untruths and obfuscation in an attempt to cover things up.
We've covered a lot of ground in this film, and I think it's fair to say that there seems to be an academic bias that is entrenched in what has become the accepted paradigm in archaeological circles. That Native Americans built the mounds, but somehow forgot that they had done so. This idea falls of its own weight. Chief Joseph Riverwind stated that the tribes can recall the battles with the giants, which begs the question, why wouldn't they also remember they constructed the mounds? Then there's the Serpent Mound, where the new signage insists that the Shawnee built it. However, as we show in the film, Chief Wallace stated on the record that the Shawnee didn't build it. Is this a managed agenda to bolster a particular narrative? When we tested the replica of the hoe used by ancient people, it became very clear that to build any size mound, let alone one that would require to move and compact over 400,000 tons of earth like Cahokia, would require an enormous workforce. Think about it. There are 10,000 mounds in Ohio alone. Why would the Catalina Museum go out of its way to redact the photograph I discovered by removing the 9-foot skeleton from the picture? To their credit, they've since changed it back to the original photograph in the new museum. But there's no reference to our scientific analysis that showed the skeleton was just under 9 feet. Wouldn't information of a giant skeleton pique the interest of the public? Why does Southern California University feel threatened by Mark Armitage's scientific study on the soft tissue found in a Trisopterus horn, which resulted in his firing? It was only when Armitage pressed the issue did he bring to heel the overarching bias that is present in academia and settled the lawsuit out of court. Fritz Zimmerman has stated in his best-selling book, Nephilim Chronicles, Fallen Angels in the Ohio Valley, that the Amorites, who were one of the Nephilim tribes present in the Promised Land 3,500 years ago, were responsible for the construction of the mounds. If this is so, it may point to the fact there was a diaspora of giants from the Promised Land to the New World, which rewrites history as we know it. Then we have what to me is one of the greatest mysteries, that one can only appreciate many of these mound sites from the air. As I stated, who is the prince of the power of the air? We are told in the biblical narrative that one of the many names of the fallen cherub, i.e. Satan the dragon, is the prince of the power of the air. We have to ask ourselves, were these mounds built in honor of an entity who would look down and see the large edifice of an undulating serpent swallowing an egg? Why is the serpent iconography used? Does it point back to what we read in the Genesis account? Who were these mysterious mound builders? And why did they seem to vanish from the face of the earth, taking their secrets with them?
We're in Moundsville, West Virginia, and we're at the Moundsville Museum. We just inquired about the large skeletons that were found within the Grave Creek Mound, and according to him, there was no record of it. There was no photos ever taken or any documentation of the large skeletons. Coming through the museums just before going out to see the mound, we find 2 old lithographs depicting giant skeletons, and the museum that was once open, that was excavated within the mound, charging a quarter to see the giants.